Okay. Hello, everyone. Um, Today, this is the Accepted Together seminar, and today we're going to be talking about acing your medical school interviews the first time. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in just a bit, but before we get started, some important pre-seminar information for you here. So the seminar is being recorded right now, so you can have access to this later on my profile. And I'll be presenting some helpful information right now, but I'm going to be advertising some packages at the very end. And if you'd like a discount code, wait until then as well. I'll share that with you. And if you have any questions, any sort of follow-up questions on what we're going to be talking about today, you can always reach me at the consultant page on the Accepted Together website for that. Okay, so a little bit about myself. So I'm a fourth year MD PhD student at the University of Alberta. So I did 2 years of medical school, the pre-clerkship years, and I've done 2 years of my PhD. Once the PhD is done, I'm going to go back and do the rest of med school. So I'm doing the traditional MD PhD program. The goal of my program essentially is to become a clinician scientist innovator with a big C, a big S, and a big I guess. That's 3 full-time jobs, but we'll see how I'm going to manage that. I'm pretty passionate about trying to use genetics and genomics and artificial intelligence and generally disruptive technologies in medicine and in basic science research. And in the health sciences sector in general. And I'm also pretty passionate about medical education, especially when it comes to folks from non-traditional background and underrepresented populations. And the reason I'm giving you the seminar on how to ace your medical school interviews the first time is because I got in the first time. So I can talk a little bit more about that. So you've gotten this email, let's say, excuse me, you've gotten this email, you've been invited to an interview, and what you want to do is you want to get here where you get an email that says you've been accepted to the program, you've been admitted. So the first thing I did before I started working on this seminar was, as everyone does nowadays, I went on ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT what are some of the things I should talk about. And obviously this model is trained on a lot of the websites that are out there right now. And so if you go online and search for this, you're going to find a lot of these sort of tips, but it's pretty nice that it actually puts a lot of these together. So essentially one of the first things it's talking about, it's you research the school and the mission of that school, look at what are those, what the values of that school is and what they're looking for in applicants. You should be prepared to talk about your motivations for why medicine, and you should have well thought out answers for that. And you have a little bit of a knowledge of the field. So you show that through essentially reading up on medical news and advancements and discussing your opinions during the interview. You prepare for some common interview questions like what makes you unique or why medicine. Obviously be yourself, be sincere, honest, and confident. Be professional in terms of dressing appropriately and being on time. And so now these 2 last things here are actually interesting that ChatGPT actually gave me this, and I'm going to just say, don't do this. I forgot to put an X on here. Don't bring a copy of your CV or resume to the interview. That's not something you do in a medical school interview. And you don't even know your interviewers to even send them a thank you note at the end to help you stand out or anything. I've seen this on some of the websites before when I was doing some research myself. So it sounds like ChatGPT kind of went online and tried different websites and came up with some of these answers. But But essentially, most of what it's talking about is pretty valuable and important. But these are not all of the things that you need. There's a few other tips and tricks and stuff that I'm going to share. So that's why I'm doing this instead of ChatGPT. Also, ChatGPT hasn't gone through the interview process. I have, so I guess that's why I'm here doing this. Okay. So let's go to the next one. So briefly, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the interview day schedule. Depending on which school this is, it could be different. So each school has like their own way of scheduling their interview days. So depending on what school it is, it's going to be different. Make sure that you know this ahead of time. Usually, it would send out some sort of a schedule to you beforehand. I mean, at this point, I think online interviews have been going on for long enough that a lot of schools have kind of gotten a little bit of a grip on this. So they probably would have a better schedule ready, and it would be probably earlier this year, for example. But it's also possible that they're still figuring it out, and so they might send it out later. So look out for that information, and if you haven't heard from them, you can always ask their admissions team to see if they know the schedule, and then that can help you a little bit. But usually the general schedule of the interview day is they would schedule multiple mini interviews, and some schools also have the traditional panel in there as well. Well, where in the multiple mini interviews, you have one person interviewing you, and in the panel, you'd have 2 or 3 people who will be asking you questions, or it might be just one person asking you, but 2 or 3 people evaluating the answers. And usually these are done in different Zoom breakout rooms. Again, I did my interviews in person. So in the in-person interviews, you had different actual breakout rooms. But online, they're just utilizing the Zoom breakout rooms. Depending on school, they might have a different way of doing this as well. And basically, during your interviews and during the questions and answers, you're being evaluated based on 2 criteria. So one is the general criteria. Essentially, the interviewer has to evaluate you and essentially answer the question of how good of a doctor will you make. So this is a pretty general thing based on whatever answer you're giving to whatever question. The question might be about, I don't know, airplanes or I don't know, hotels or something, not necessarily about medicine directly, but they're supposed to actually infer some information from the way you respond to those sorts of questions about generally how good of a doctor will you make. And there are some specific criteria that each of the questions evaluate as well. So these are the competencies that you're being evaluated on. So that's essentially what they evaluate you as well. So essentially your final score is going to be a combination of the scores given by multiple interviewers. And again, depending on school, this is different. So there are some certain schools that might actually use Z scores to make sure that they're accounting for strict and not very strict interviewers. You have a panel, for example, and in the panel there's like 3 interviewers, so your final score of the panel has to be an average of those 3. And in multiple mini interviews, they might actually do an average of all of those as well, or get rid of the worst one of your stations. And keep in mind that your interviewers can be from any field. They could be in medicine, they could be physicians, medical students, residents. They could be from general sciences, they could have a PhD in cell biology, for example, or they could be neither. They could be from the general public and not even have a degree or anything in medicine or sciences. So don't assume that everyone in the panel is a physician. Don't assume that no one in the panel is a physician either. So you're going to get a combination of people from different backgrounds. So I guess a few things to do right away. So a few things to do right away. Go back and read your full application again. So whatever you've written in your application, go back and read it. It's been a while since you've submitted it. You've probably forgotten some of the stuff you've written in there. So it's always good to go back and see what you've said. Think about the details of what you've put on your application. So the stuff that you've put on your full application, it's important to have details on those. And you, at the time when you've done this, you probably didn't have enough room to put everything in there. So it's mostly been probably essentially like, you've done this is the title of it, this is the number of hours you've spent on it, and this is whoever is verifying your like your specific experience. So think about the details of those though, because you probably didn't put too much detail on there, but it's important to have a grip of what you actually wanted to say, and you didn't have enough room to say it, just because there might be questions during the interview that you could elaborate on some of these things that you've had. Think about why you want to become a doctor. This is an important question, and I think a lot of people would probably just answer, oh, I want to help people. I'm sure you can come up with a less generic answer to this question. This is too generic of an answer, to be honest. So think about why exactly you want to become a doctor and have some sort of an answer ready. Don't be robotic in terms of practicing this, but have some sort of an answer ready so that you actually know what the reason is behind you wanting to be a doctor. Think about why you've chosen the school, what you're bringing to the table and what they have. So this is important because they might ask you, why should we choose you? Or why have you chosen this certain school? And because this is closest to my hometown, probably is not the best answer to say to an interviewer during an interview. So think about what some of the I guess perks of that certain school are. Think about what you're bringing to the table, and talk about essentially how those two match together. And I will just talk a little bit about it in a bit as well. But it's also important to talk to students who are going to that school to kind of get a sense of what exactly that school has and what they stand for, what their values are, what are some of the good things about their program, and all that stuff as well. Another thing to do right away is to think about some of the current events and how they're affecting the world. This is an important step because this is going to give you a lot of knowledge about what are the current events, and these things might come up during the interview as well. And so think about the major issues that are facing the world and what your opinions about them are. So like, for example, I don't know, like very recently an earthquake happened. So there might be a question about that, or COVID, it's still is still something that's ongoing. So that's something that they might ask a question about. So have an idea of these things, and these are going to essentially help you prepare answers to some of the questions that are going to be commonly asked during the interviews. So thinking about the current events and major issues and how they're affecting the world, and also what your opinions are about this, are going to be important to try and answer some of these common questions. And one thing I will say here, because I know this has been debated a little bit here and there with a lot of preparations online and stuff. As much as knowing the details about medical ethics and health law and what exactly the law is about a certain thing is helpful, you don't need to know them. So there's no issue with just saying, I'm not sure what the rules on this are, but this is how I would approach this situation. For example, if you get a question like that needs a little bit of knowledge. They know that you're not medical students. They know that you're not physicians. And some of these things you don't learn until you actually become a physician or you're in your residency. So they're not going to expect you to know the nitty-gritty details of health law. Like I said, it's good to know them. If you know them, for sure, use them. But if you don't sweat it as much. You don't need to go through medical ethics books before the interviews to essentially be ready for ethical dilemmas and stuff. Just have opinions about this. Make sure you've seen enough questions that you can form your opinions about things. And if there is something that needs a little bit of, I guess, law knowledge, you can always say, I'm not sure what the law on this is, but this is how I would approach it if it does let me. Some more tips in terms of the interview, like ChatGPT was saying, be honest. It's always better to be vulnerable than untruthful. So as much as there are certain times that you're like, oh, like this might come off as too vulnerable. And at those points, you have to have some sort of balance. Like this is something you might want to think about before your interviews. But it's always better to be vulnerable than just lie during your interviews. So always, always, always be honest. Show enthusiasm and excitement during your interviews. So this is very important to come off in both in your tone and with your body language. And I know this might be a little bit harder when you're doing this over Zoom, but it's still possible. And also, like, your anxiety might actually be a little bit lower just because you're at your home environment, and it's not that you're like in this, like, immersed in the interview fully. So it might actually help with that. So make sure that you're thinking about you showing your excitement and enthusiasm while you're talking, and also like with your body language, the way you move yourself, the way you move your hands and stuff like that as well. Be confident, but not too arrogant. And there's a fine line between the two. And this is actually very important, because a lot of the interviewers are actually very trained or experienced in this enough that they would see signs of arrogance. So be very careful in terms of where you go with your arrogance and confidence. So just make sure that you have some sort of a threshold, and you're confident enough, but you're not too overconfident, and you're not arrogant. Being respectful. I think this doesn't even need too much explanation. Just make sure that you're respecting your interviewers. When they ask you questions, answer them respectfully. Show the respect in your body language, the way you talk, the words you use, the tone of your language, and all of that stuff. It's pretty important. Be professional. So this, like ChatGPT was saying, make sure you're on time. Make sure you're wearing professional clothing. And then make sure you're professional in your speech as well. The words you use, the way you say them, and all that stuff is pretty important. So make sure you come off as very much a professional during this interview, because you're interviewing for a professional position essentially. I've seen this question come up as well. A lot of interviewees and other students have asked this question. Should I try and make my interviewers laugh? That should not be your priority. So making your interviewers laugh should not be your main priority. But if you get the opportunity, take it. Now, even in those situations, you have to think a little bit carefully about whether this is actually the right time and the right thing to say. So be careful with the jokes you're making. So there's a lot of I guess points that needs to go into this. So sometimes it's just better to avoid it fully. But if you're the type of person that knows how to tell jokes, and when you get the opportunity, you actually like tell good jokes, and you think they're gonna laugh at this and it's gonna help with the mood and all that stuff, go for it. But just be careful on how you're doing it. And like the main important thing, you've probably heard it so many times, is fake it till you make it. So if you think you're not confident enough, if you think you're not like enthusiastic enough or excited enough, just fake it until you make it. And this is going to happen during your practice. So when you're practicing, this is going to come out, and you're gonna be doing that, and this helps with your anxiety as well. So like through practice, you can actually work on this and essentially make it at some point. So I have this scenario I took from one of the websites online. So let's say the interviewer asks you, so why do you want to be a physician? The good old question of, why do you want to become a doctor? And then The candidate answers, because medicine is such a challenging field and I have always loved challenges. I don't know how people feel about this, but to me, it's a very cliche response. And it's just such big words being used that it's like, this is not really personal. As much as you say you've always loved challenges, it's still not personal. Plus, like, it doesn't feel like medicine is not the only field that's challenging. There's a lot of challenging fields. And if you love challenges, you can do a lot of other things as well. The question is, why do you want to become a physician specifically? So either you would go a little bit further into details of this and say why medicine is the challenging field you like, or like don't even say anything about it being challenging. Now the interviewer strikes back and it's like, okay, but what really attracted you to a career in medicine? So a candidate goes, I'm very curious about how things work and I really love science. Again, you could have put this right after the first sentence and it would have made it a little bit better without the interviewer trying to ask that question again. But the issue is this sentence alone is also pretty generic. You can do a lot of, you love science and you're curious about how things work. And lo and behold, obviously the interviewer comes back and is like, why not become a research scientist? Why medicine? Because if you're curious about how things work and you really love science, the research scientist is probably the best way to go. So why medicine? And the candidate comes back and is like, medicine is dynamic and more suited to my personality. Again, pretty generic answer. It's just describing certain things about medicine. But like I said, if you look at the 3 sentences the candidate has responded with, if you put these together, you might actually get a better response than you responding to the interviewer's question every single time. Now, the interviewer comes back and says, okay, thank you for clarifying that. Now onto something else. So why do you want to become a physician? So this is, and I took this from one of the American websites. So depending on whether you're applying to US schools or Canadian schools, this might be a little bit different, but sometimes in US schools, the interviewers actually are allowed to go back and ask the same question. In Canadian schools, sometimes the interviewers don't go back and ask that question. So you have to be very careful in how you're responding to these questions because you might not get a second chance. In this case, the interviewer essentially gave the candidate a second chance of how to answer this question. But the issue is because this certain candidate has gone through iterations of answering that question, I don't know if they have any other answers to even say when they are given a second chance. So that's why I was mentioning initially that make sure that you actually know the answer to why you would want to become a doctor, because that's an important question that you're going to be asked, and you need to have an answer for that. Okay, so I guess personally, what did I do to prepare? So one of the major things, as I was mentioning just before, was I talked to medical students. So especially those that were from schools that I was interested in. So I went and talked to them about the school, what the curriculum looks like, what do they like about the school, what do they don't like about the school, how they prepared themselves for the interviews and all of that stuff. And this was helpful because you get an idea not about the school, but also about the interview process in that school as well. So it's easier to prepare for the interviews, and also you have a sense of what the school looks like and what their mission and values are. And if they ask you the question of why do you want to become a medical student in this certain school, you have an answer to that as well, just because you've talked to people from the inside, I guess. Another thing I did, I signed up for a ton of newsletters. And essentially once, I think initially it was more of a blind sign up for a lot of newsletters. And then I got them like it was on a weekly basis, for example. And then when I was getting them, I was just looking at them, was like, okay, maybe this is not too relevant. So I unsubscribed from a bunch, but I still had a ton more left that were pretty relevant, but also they were concise. And this helped me a lot in terms of just not only seeing what the current events and the issues in the world are right now, but also getting an idea of how to even form an opinion about some of these things and what some of the different people are thinking about this. If it's a certain debate, what the both sides or multiple sides of the debate think about it as well. So it was pretty helpful in essentially putting together my own thoughts and opinions about some of these things as well. And with the same line of reasoning, I listened to lots of podcasts. And again, same thing, you learn a lot of new things about the current events that are happening in the world. And you also form sorts of opinions about things as well that will help you with your interview as well. And then the other important thing is, as much as it's good to have podcasts and newsletters and websites and all that stuff about medicine and read about them and like the current events that are relevant to your interviews, keep doing what you're doing in terms of your personal interests. If you love reading certain novels and you don't think they're totally relevant to your interviews, first of all, they don't have to be. Keep doing what you're doing in terms of your personal interests. That's pretty fine by itself. Plus, even if you think it's irrelevant, like it's not directly relevant, rather, it might be relevant and it might actually help you in terms of forming your opinions and how you respond to questions and all that stuff as well. So keep doing what you're doing in terms of personal interest as well. So that's what I did as well. So there were certain books that I was still interested in reading, so I kept doing those. There were certain projects that I was interested in doing, so I kept doing those. I didn't really stop those things that I was doing on the side. Very important thing, this is kind of about practicing as well, but just discussing relevant issues with other people. So I had a friend that we would discuss ethical things, not necessarily medical related, but just about anything. We discussed a lot of these things together as well, and that was pretty helpful too. And the other thing I did, I actually spent some time to think about the structure of my answers. This was a balance of essentially between you being robotically practiced and not practiced at all. So I made sure that I was practiced to some extent, but I don't come off as pretty as robotic. This is pretty important, because if I guess it depends on the interviewer. Some interviewers don't really care about this, but some interviewers are pretty strict about if they feel like you're pretty robotically practiced, they're like, okay, in medicine, you're not going to have a lot of chance to prepare for a lot of these things. And as much as, sure, like we did tell you you're going to have a medical interview, it's still a good idea to be open to essentially responding questions on the spot. But just having some sort of a structure ahead of time on how you answer some of your questions. And this is something you can practice with me as well, if you'd like. Like we'll talk about the packages in just a bit, but this is something I can offer as well, just to go through the structure of what you can talk about during your interviews. And that kind of brings to what I was just telling you as well. So practice with an expert who has gone through the experience as well. This is what I did too. One of my friends had recently gotten in, so we actually practiced it in the same environment that I was going to be in for the interviews. And so obviously, you probably know this was coming. So practice, practice, practice. So make sure you practice with lots of sample questions on your own. So these are available online for free on a lot of different websites. There's a ton of sample questions you can go through. Don't just go through the questions, because if you, and I'm sure, like if you look online, like there's just so many that you won't even have enough time to go through all of them before your interviews. Having said that, you can still go through all of them if you just look at the question and you're like, oh yeah, I'll respond to this way, this way, this way, this way, and then that's 30 seconds, and then you move on to the next question. But rather do actually practice it the way you're going to be doing the interview itself. So if you have, let's say, 2 minutes and 8 minutes, so do practice it like that. So give yourself 2 minutes, make your notes and all that stuff, and then practice responding to that within 8 minutes as well. So it's very important to actually practice it like that. Practicing it with someone else, preferably an expert of some sort, is actually helpful, because they can also give feedback to you on how they felt and how they felt about your responses, how they could have approached something that you might have not thought about as well. So it's pretty good to do that sort of thing as well. And like I was mentioning, practice it the way you will be interviewed. So if you're being interviewed over Zoom, and your interview is obviously timed. So make sure you're actually doing it like that. It doesn't have to be all of your practice. This doesn't have to be the way you practice all of your questions. You certainly can just look over some questions and just be like, okay, this is how I would respond to this question, but I don't want to do this in a timed manner. But for the most part, try and make sure that you actually practice it the way you're going to be interviewed. So like like I said, if your interview is over Zoom and it's timed, make sure that you're actually doing it over Zoom. If there's no one else to practice it with, you can still practice it yourself. Just open your Zoom and just pretend that you're actually talking to the interviewer, just the same way that people were talking about, like you practice in front of a mirror or something. It's the same thing, essentially. And then practice drawing from your experience and expertise to answer questions as well, and make sure that you're actually making your answers personal to yourself. So as much as there's a lot of answers online to a lot of these sorts of questions, it's still very important to practice it based on your personal experience, and essentially bring in a lot of that sort of stuff into. And I guess this is where I'm going to talk about my packages. These are the current packages that are available. So you can get a general consultation with me for an hour. My interview prep is 5 hours right now. So we do 5 sessions of 1 hour, or we can move it around, do, I don't know, 2 sessions of 2 hours and 1 session of 1 hour at the end. So I'm pretty flexible on how we do these 5 hours. I guess a lot of you are probably going to be looking for interviews at this point. So application review and Casper prep might not exactly be something you're looking for, but if that's something you're looking for as well, those are the packages I have. I guess Casper still is relevant. So some of you might not have taken it already. Actually, never mind. No, you would have taken it if you've gotten an interview at this point. Anyway, so these are also my other packages that are available, and I'm also pretty open to essentially create new ones as well. So if there's any sort of stuff that you need in terms of packages, just let me know through the website, and I can make new packages. So I'm pretty versed in helping students with these. I've helped each year. I think I've helped about 5 to 10 students to get in, and I'm always happy when I get emails where people are like, "Oh, I just got in," or "My God, like I just got an email that I got in." So like it's always great to hear those and see those sorts of emails from the students. So yeah, those are my packages right now, and those of you who stayed until now get to actually get a discount as well. Whenever you're purchasing a package on the website, you can put this discount code 10 off on there and get 10% off the packages I have available on the website as well. So make sure you use this when you're booking a session. And with that, again, if you have any questions, reach out to me on the website. And this QR code also directly goes to my profile. So that's an easier way than typing the whole thing up there. So if you want to do that, that's also possible. And I'm also open to any questions you might have right now as well. And I'm going to stop recording here, and then we can get to questions.